What's going on, everybody? So today we're going to be talking about Rupert Sanders' vision of The Crow. So you may not know this about me, but the original 1994 film is one of my favorite movies of all time. I think it's nearly flawless. And Brandon Lee's depiction is able to efficiently and hopefully juggle a spectrum of emotions and themes beautifully. The gothic, melodramatic, and bleak Detroit environment juxtaposed perfectly with the positive, prevalent, and hopeful messages about love. And with all that being said, I loved that movie and that will never change. So I knew in order to watch this movie, I had to look at this film as its own thing. And luckily, this in no way, shape, or form is trying to replace the original or remake it. So after I opened my heart to the idea of a new The Crow movie, I can say I can appreciate that this movie is entirely different from any of the previous entries in the franchise. For starters, Bill Skarsgård gave a strong performance, and you can tell that the flaws in this film had nothing to do with him. After all, he's not in the writing room. But Bill is just charismatic as hell, and it helps that they got one of the most attractive actors currently in Hollywood for the movie. Regardless of if he's got the Jared Leto Joker look to him, he makes it work, and you kinda get used to his look pretty early on. And he was driven in a way that you'd expect The Crow to be presented, albeit far more linear because he only has one objective, because outside of the idea of getting revenge for Shelley, he's got nothing else going for him. I also found it interesting that to give a twist to the powers of the Crow, they added more texture by saying even though he's given these godly powers, it doesn't necessarily mean that he knows how to use them. And Eric Draven kind of gets his ass kicked quite often in this movie, and we're shown that even from his time in rehab, he's not a fighter. He gradually got better or more aware of his powers at the very least as the story went on, and I can appreciate that the movie took more of a realistic approach until he got to his maximum potential. But once he gets there, the effects and kills in this movie are probably the best part of the film by far. The up-close healing shots on Eric's body were so sick. In particular, the opera house chunk of the film when he's hunting down Marion, all those action scenes were really well done. The practical effects and choreography was awesome, and honestly the whole sequence was great, because it balanced comedy since some of those kills were outrageous and almost accidental along with just visceral gore. The problem is that that's literally all I found interesting in the film. This movie doesn't feel like it has an identity of its own. The pacing is also really bad, and on top of that, even if I put my bias aside, they make this whole story between Shelley and Eric that I just didn't feel like it worked. They became infatuated with each other so fast, like in a matter of days, they were saying their vows to each other and saying how they would die for each other because they've never loved anyone else outside of each other. Like, if you're going to use that trope, it should be done better than this. And it also felt rushed, and we're talking about a movie that's already 2 hours long. And on that note, I am of the opinion that Shelley doesn't need to be an actual character for the story to work. But especially in this movie, I really didn't like her character. She's not likable and just annoying with that overused damaged finds damaged gimmick. He's beautifully broken and so is she. Y'all are just horny for each other and nothing else. It's crazy to think that the original did an infinitely better job at showing the love between Eric and Shelley was barely in that movie. Shelley's also the character with the dumbest decisions. Like, if you escaped the rehab center, why would you go back to your home? Like, you know that they're gonna find you so easily if you go there. Like, your friend died because she went back home. Also, you have money. Your mom is rich. Why not have escaped town like you were insinuating for the longest time in the movie? It was just frustrating to see the love montage while thinking they should have left to anywhere else by this point. And even more annoying is, why did we need to spend time with Shelley's mom? That's like making Peter Parker or Bruce Wayne's parents matter in their movies. They don't matter. It's irrelevant to the story. And on the villain's end, Danny Hudson is great in 30 Days of Night, but here his performance feels corny and lackluster, especially when compared to Michael Wincott's masterful, nefarious Top Dollar. That was such a memorable and despicable performance that seeing Roke just felt like a laughable villain. And realistically, he comes nowhere near being able to best the Crow. He seems so vulnerable and pathetic when faced with the one-man army Eric, and generally just feels so unthreatening. Also, his powers are frustrating because they're vague as hell. Like, I'm not a fan of the fact that there's a supernatural supernatural elements outside of the crow's abilities, but on top of that, his whole power of suggestion thing is so lame. He basically convinces your darkest thoughts to come to fruition, which basically equates to either suicide or, in Shelley's case, harming others, because I don't know. And adding in last minute plot convenience sapping powers wasn't any better. Like, him becoming the crow would have been the best joke of the movie. And when it comes to the supernatural elements, the Crow is also in a weird spot for me, since half the time it felt like a negotiation was happening between him and the spirit in the other world. I was completely thrown off by the fact that there was like 2 phases of the transformation as well. Like, phase 1 is a trial run where he's still getting his ass handed to him, but phase 2 is like the version that we're expecting as the audience to see. I loved the simple case of the original where these powers were placed on him by chance, and it really wasn't a choice, more so because his motive was the one that made the decision for him. Here, it felt like he could just kind of opt out of it. Adding in the detail to be able to choose if you want the crow's powers makes it feel like the situation isn't so dire anymore. And honestly, every time that we enter the purgatory space, it really gave me so much whiplash, and I really felt like I was being pulled out of the movie. It doesn't help that the editing for this movie is very strange. Like, it's just cut weirdly. Like, some of the transitions are just random and out of place. The amount of exposition in this movie is absurd. We don't need to have the spirit tell Eric everything he can do and even what his objective should be. We've seen in the past that this can all be shown and the audience will understand. Show, don't tell is much better in my opinion. Probably the thing that upsets me the most is that one of the best attributes of the original is how perfectly it showcased the various shades of heroism. There's many ways to do good outside of punching bad guys. The film had shown how saving people can be done in so many creative and nuanced ways, such as saving Sarah from the trauma and misfortune that Eric had, or how a drug addict like her mom can be saved and be someone in her daughter's life. Like, the movie shows so much more real world scenarios outside of being a vigilante. Yet here, all of that is thrown out the window. This movie really is just about a guy that beats up a bunch of bad guys, and he just happened to be dressed as the Crow. Hell, he doesn't even use the Crow, like the actual bird, as an asset at all. Not a single shot was shown from a bird's POV. Instead, we got a whole bunch of aerial shots, and we're expected to assume that that's the same thing. The bird literally holds no stakes in this movie. It literally is just an action movie that's dressed like the Crow, as opposed to this actually being a Crow movie. This movie just doesn't have the heart that made the original film work so well. And I'm not gonna bash the lack of gothic aesthetic from this version of Detroit, since Detroit already gets enough heat and bad representation from literally all other movies. This version is just not as memorable since it's not as immersive and almost generic looking. I know Sanders also made Ghost in the Shell, and I didn't really enjoy that film either, so I just feel like after having watched this film, I don't think Sanders has a knack for creating adaptation from other material. Tragically, it feels like it's just gonna go down as any of the Black Christmas remakes, where it's gonna be forgotten or remembered for bad reasons. Maybe that's a bit of an extreme comparison, since here there's actually some things that are actually decent. Ultimately, this is just really forgettable, and outside of the kills and gore, this is just really not a rewatchable movie. It's unremarkable, and that's kind of the worst type of feeling to have for a movie that has this title, in my opinion. In that sense, it really does follow the curse of the Crow. If you didn't know, this movie was plagued for like a decade with production issues or recasting issues, and it really felt like this movie was never really gonna get made. So sadly, this felt like Lionsgate said, oh, we finally got some form of a product, let's just release it. But that's about it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe. My name's Anthony, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.